Hi,
I thought you
John.
weren't going to
How are
tease
you?
about it.
Sorry about that.
All right, say the
Back
thing.
to normal. Oh, welcome to Wise Fool. It's not the Bible study you want, it's the Bible study you need.
Yeah, last week Gary was out, and we had Steve
Yep.
Collins come in and not take your place, but he stood in. Nobody can take your place,
He was subbing for me. Yeah.
but he did nail it. He did say it's not the Bible study you want, it's the Bible study you need. The first time out of the gate,
First time out of the gate. Wow.
he didn't mess it up. And so
Yeah.
I told him that I would make sure that you understood that when you got back. That
It only took me about 6 months to get that down. I don't know why that
right, but
was.
no practice.
Yeah.
But we were talking. Yeah, Gary was commenting about how the camera was way up high, and we were looking down at Steve, and the reason that is because that was literally the first time that he's ever done an
Yeah.
online, video thing, and so his son had to help him set it up, and his son had to, get everything running, and so he was super nervous about it, and he kept saying to me when I asked him to do it, he said, "I don't know how to do it. I've never done it." And I said, "You'll be fine." And then the camera was way up high, um, and I think he was afraid to move it because I think he was afraid that if
Yeah.
he messed with it, he was going to break something. So
Well, we tease the ones we love.
we do.
So,
We
yeah.
tease the ones we
Yeah.
love. So everybody's here. Well, a lot of
Oh,
people are
good.
here. Doctor's here. Ray's here. Apple cider. Apple cider does sound good.
Hmm.
Dale's here, asking about grandsons. So you guys are all they're having their conversations
Yeah,
over there.
that's
Word
good.
watchers there. Hey, welcoming Gary back.
Hey, thanks for having me, friend. Thanks for welcoming me back. Yeah.
Ken's here, and there may be some others, but that's all I see currently. Uh,
Ken sent me a bunch of links to some things, and I haven't had time to look at them yet. I will take a look at it later, Ken, when I get a
like
chance.
Bible stuff.
Well, he sent me something on Bill Watterson. I'm always interested in Bill Watterson, who was the
Calvin and
genius
Hobbes.
who wrote Calvin and Hobbes and illustrated it. And yeah, I missed that strip. That's I have several of those books, by the way.
Calvin and
Yep.
Hobbes books.
Yep. And
Yep.
Word Watcher watched me online on Sunday, I guess. I spoke at my church on Sunday about the second coming. I guess the way it was worded in the Facebook post was I'm going to be speaking on the second coming, and so people were confused that I was actually on when Jesus comes back. I'm going to be speaking that day,
Hmm.
uh, and I said
So you,
no, it's about
right.
not it's
I'll be
not
speaking
on.
on the second coming. Right. I've
Yeah,
got it
right.
figured out. It's going to be this
Yeah,
Sunday. And it coincides exactly with when our church service normally is. So that's going to be very
exactly.
convenient for us. We'll be at
Funny how that
church
worked
when
out.
Christ returns. Um,
Yeah. So, and I went
yeah.
long, and I always have to apologize for that. I get. Oh, and this is an interesting thing too, John. I every once in a while I forget to wear my contact lenses because I don't need them for like distance. I don't need them. I need them to read. So
Oh,
close
okay.
up stuff, I need them. And so I that morning I get to church and somebody showed me something on their phone. Hey, look at this, and I look at it and I thought, oh, it's really
Oh, no.
blurry.
I don't have my
and
contacts.
So I had some readers in my briefcase that I carry, and but the readers were not good. They were terrible. They were like a magnifier, so I had to get like real close to see.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't smooth. You ever had those times, John, when you're up on stage and things are just not going well?
No,
Never had that.
it's never happened.
Not once.
No. In the hundreds and hundreds of times that I've been on stage, it's always been flawless. Ken wants a link to last Sunday's message.
Oh, okay.
I don't know
It
if you
was in
have.
my newsletter, Ken. I think Ken gets my newsletter. It was in my newsletter.
Okay. On your
But I'll send
website.
you the link, Ken.
Is
I'll
it on
send
your
it to you.
website? Okay.
I don't think I put it on my website. I need to do that.
Yeah, that
The
would
thing
be.
is, they don't. They are. I wish that they put. I wish they put that stuff on YouTube, but they don't. They just put it on Facebook, and not everybody does Facebook.
We know that. We
Yeah.
know that.
So
So, I had a question I was going to ask you, and I don't remember what it was. Um, Dale says that it didn't affect the information. It was a very good talk.
Oh,
So
good, good.
apparently your
Thank you. Thanks, Dale.
inability to see was not a deterrent in your communication.
Well,
Oh, I remember what it was.
it's a message that I've been working on for like 40 years. But go ahead. You have your
I was
question.
going to talk about Bill Watterson for a minute. That
Yes.
I read something that he wrote a long time ago now,
Hmm.
because I was still working at my day job when I read it, and talking about he was talking at some sort of cartoonists gathering. I don't remember what
Yeah.
it was, but it was a keynote address that he was giving at some cartoonist convention.
Probably
Uh,
the NCS, the National Cartoonist Society
it probably
convention.
was,
Yeah.
whatever. But he was talking about the dinosaurs of the cartoon world, and
Yeah.
these are the strips. This was long enough ago that there were still strips in newspapers. You remember newspapers?
Hmm.
And he was talking to the cartoonists about these strips, and he didn't mention any of them by name, but everybody kind of knew what he was talking about. These strips that
Yeah.
the original creator has now gone away and handed it over to a syndication or some sort of a third
Yeah.
party that now keeps it going in perpetuity. And
Yeah.
he
It's
says
unlike
that,
it's like on Cartoonist 4 or 5 by now. Yeah.
right. And so he says that he said that's a shame and that shouldn't happen. And he was talking
Right.
about the impact that that's having on the entire industry. And again, this was a long time ago when he was doing it, but he was saying that it actually drags the whole industry down because there are other cartoonists that are out there that are trying to break
Yeah.
in, but this
Yeah.
space is being taken by
Right.
these other entities they're not funny anymore. They don't have anything to say. And that's what I remember taking
Yeah.
away from it was he was saying once you have said what you intend to say, then you should be done.
Yeah.
You should stop. And this was
Yeah.
after he had already retired from Calvin and Hobbes, and so he was
Yeah.
saying it, as someone who was actually
Who
taking his
actually
own
did it?
advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that
So
was
in
interesting.
the olden days, if you got a syndication, and I'm talking about like in the 30s, 40s, if you got syndication, you basically signed your life away. The syndicate owned the cartoon,
Hmm.
and you were just the guy doing it. And then, so if you left, they just got somebody else to do it.
Right.
You couldn't take your cartoon. Let's say that you are not happy with your syndicate and you wanted to switch to another syndicate.
Too bad.
They wouldn't let you do that because the contracts were written that way. So I'm with Creators Syndicate, and Creators Syndicate was one of the first ones that uh, broke the mold, and they were going to allow the creator to hold on to their creation. So their contracts were written such that we're going to make you some guarantees. If we don't live up to that, you can take your strip and go somewhere else. Then we're not going to replace you with somebody else unless that's okay with you. And so some guys, when they die, then somebody else just comes in and takes their place and just
Hmm.
keeps doing the strip, trying to do it in their style. And it's never quite this. It's not the same. I mean,
Right.
the originator has in his mind what that world looks like, and everybody else is just trying to make gags.
Right.
Nobody could draw Calvin and Hobbes. They can draw like him, but they don't have his mind, and his mind is what made the strip.
Right.
And so, anyway, it's gone
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Well, uh, it's interesting. Like when Jim Henson died, and
Yeah,
all of the characters like Ernie and Bert and Ernie and Kermit the Frog and I'm trying to think of others. Well, Ernie was the big one, and Kermit, of course, was the big one. When they got
yeah,
somebody to replace him, you could tell. You could tell that it wasn't the
yeah,
same person
yeah. You can tell.
doing that character. Um,
Right, right.
it was close. It was close. It was good. It was passable. But those of
Yeah,
us who remember Henson doing Kermit the Frog, we could tell that it wasn't the same
yeah.
person. And then the
And the
people that
same
grew
thing
up with
happened
somebody
with
else, yeah.
the Charlie Brown animations.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, you had those kid voices, those real kids,
Right.
and they're just reading those lines. But then later on, when those kids are grown up, they can't use the same kids, and they try to use somebody else, and it just falls apart for me. Because the sound is not right.
Right. Right. There was the Charlie Brown animations we're a little off topic tonight, but the
Yeah.
Charlie Brown animations were the kid actors, as far as voice actors go, they weren't really that great. I mean,
No, no, they weren't.
they were stuttered, and they were kind of monotone for some of the characters, but it works with those cartoons. I'm
Yeah, it
with you.
did.
If somebody else comes in, even if they're a better, more dramatic voice actor, it's just
I know.
it's incongruent now. It's like, wait, that's not how they sound. They're
Yeah,
not
it
that
doesn't
good.
sound. It
Yeah,
doesn't sound right because now mentally I'm connected to that voice with Charlie Brown or Linus or Lucy, and the
yeah,
goofy sounds that Snoopy makes. And if somebody with a different tone to their voice is doing it, or like you said, even if they're better at the voice acting,
right.
it doesn't work because the characters are really kind of stiff and
Yeah,
anyway. Yeah, we
no,
are all topic tonight.
yeah. Christine is late, so we will forgive her for that.
We were filling time here, waiting
Waiting,
for we were
waiting for you, Christine.
yeah, we're
Marilyn's here
stretching for
now.
Christine.
All
I
right, so
looked for Marilyn at my church last week, but she wasn't there. She came the first time I spoke, and then
and she didn't.
she didn't come last week. That's
Didn't come
last
last
week.
week.
That's all right. All is forgiven.
We're in Genesis
Yeah.
16 tonight, as you probably
Genesis 16, we're going to talk about Ishmael.
knew.
There's only 16 verses.
That's 8 apiece.
Yes.
So
You went first the last couple times.
what
I'll go
happened
first
to
this
it?
time.
I had it shared, and now it's gone, so I got to share it again. Okay. Fortunately, that doesn't require monolithic effort. Boom.
Boom.
All right.
There we go.
So you're going first.
I'll go first. All right. Genesis
I'm
16.
gonna scooch us over here. Okay.
All right. Verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. And this happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "This is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show you who's wrong, you or me." Abram replied, "Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. And the angel said to her, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she replied.
The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." Then he added, "I will give you more descendants than you can count." And the angel also said, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. For the Lord has heard your cries of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives." Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord, who had spoken to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." She also said, "Have I truly seen the one who sees me?" So that well was named Beer Lahai Roy, which means well of the living one who sees me. It can still be found between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born.
Very good.
Kaboom.
Beer, Lahai, Lahai
Roy.
Roy. Nice. You that just rolled right off your tongue.
It did, didn't it? It
Yeah. Let me
almost like I knew how to pronounce it,
exactly. Let
which
me
I don't.
pray. Father, thank you for this time together. I pray that you be with us and that your Holy Spirit would lead us as we look into your word, help us in our conversation, and it might be edifying to everyone who hears. And we pray for you to be glorified, and we ask it in Jesus' name, amen.
Hmm.
All right. So this is an interesting little family decision.
It is. It
So
is.
this is a problem in that um, besides the sexual relations thing, which is a
Hmm.
big problem, but it's a
Hmm.
big problem when we try to get ahead of God.
Hmm.
So God had made Abram a promise, and they got tired of waiting. It'd been 10 years,
Hmm.
and they got tired of waiting. So, and then the other thing is that Sarai was the one who was supposed to have the baby, and she is barren. She hasn't been able to have any children, and now she's what is she, like 90? She's getting
She's
really up there in
getting up
age,
there. Yeah. Abram's
and
86, so
he was 86, so she was younger than him, but still far beyond probably the childbearing years.
she's
And
not 16 anymore.
no, and we're probably assuming she doesn't look like she did when they went to Egypt. So a lot
Well,
of
you
time
wonder,
has passed.
do we know how old Hagar was?
No, I don't. We don't know. Which the other thing about this story is that Hagar, she wouldn't even been with them if they didn't go to Egypt. They would have never met Hagar. She wouldn't have been there. This child would have never been born by it. So everything changes. But because they made a bad decision and then came home with all the goods, and it makes sense now because now he's a rich guy because the king in Egypt made him rich by giving him all, get out of here, take all your
Hmm.
stuff. And that's why after, we looked at in a previous chapter when there was a war took place, and and Abram went and rescued Lot, brought him back.
Right.
And remember, the king of Sodom came out and said, "Hey, you can keep all the loot. Just give me the people." And he said, "No, I'm not keeping the loot because I don't want anybody to say that you made me rich." And so that's
Right.
an interesting little twist. But yeah, so they shouldn't have had Hagar. But this
Well,
shows you a problem that happens when you try to get ahead of God. And don't we all do that? I mean, there are times when we get antsy about, we want to get things in our life going and the things aren't happening as fast as we'd hoped. Have you ever experienced that, John?
well, I don't know. I don't know. We kind of talked about this a few weeks ago, where there's a I have sympathy for people who are trying to help God out, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, he doesn't need it. He doesn't need your help. I just don't know how. Uh, I don't know how God. I don't know how God gets mad or could get mad. I'm not trying to speak for him, but the scripture doesn't seem to indicate that God was especially upset with how it went down. You know, because he didn't say, yeah, he didn't send an angel. At least we're not told that he did. He'd send an angel to correct or to rebuke them. You know, how dare you do this thing, against my will? You've displayed a lack of faith or whatever. And he actually goes to, he goes to Hagar after she's been. The whole thing is just so weird and dysfunctional. You've got Sarai going to Abram saying, "Hey, here's my servant. Take
Yeah.
her, and then we can get this promise started. We can get
Yeah.
this thing going that God said we're gonna, and yay, won't that be great?" And
But
so Abraham's
but
like, "Okay,
yeah,
yep."
but is it a sin for Abram to sleep with a woman who's not his wife? It
Well,
is. It is. And the other thing too is like before the flood, we don't have any indication that God came down and tried to stop them from sinning. They just were doing it, and He
Hmm.
allowed it to go on until He finally said, "You've gone completely too far. Everybody's thoughts are evil continually, so I'm going to put a stop to that."
Hmm.
And we talked about that when we were in Genesis chapter 6. But I think in this case, He lets us go, and He doesn't approve of what we're doing. And I don't think God had his approval on this, but what they were doing to accomplish what they thought God wanted, they were going to sin to do it. So God's intent for marriage was one man with one woman for life. That's what Jesus said uh, in
Right. A
Matthew
bunch of time
19.
later. Right. A bunch of time
Yeah,
later. And he
yeah,
was
but
saying,
He said from the beginning, this is what.
right, but
And
these,
so we
but
saw the first polygamy happen in Genesis chapter 4. So I mean, it didn't take long for them to break that law.
right. But what I think what what Jesus was explaining was this. I don't know that they were. I don't know that they were cognizant of the sinfulness of it at this point, because Jesus was, that's what Jesus was saying. And he was talking about Moses. This was even before Moses. He said, well, Moses
Yeah, right.
permitted you
Before
to
the
divorce
law.
each other because your hearts were hard, because you were
Yeah.
basically, you were just wretched sinners, and
Hmm.
God hadn't, he hadn't he hadn't brought that down on them yet. And so you've got Abram and Sarai. I don't know that they thought. I don't think that they thought that it was a sin for him to sleep with the servant, because if they did, I don't think they would have been so. Hey, here's my servant. Why don't you take her? He's like, okay, well, it's a good idea. So we'll take. I mean, if they thought that they were sinning, I think they would have been a little more careful about it. But I really think that they thought that they were doing a good thing. And they weren't, but they didn't know that they weren't doing a good thing. And it takes Jesus to come along and go, yeah, you guys were able to divorce each other. Um, you just had to give a certificate of divorce because you were hard-hearted people. But now I'm giving you a little more broad picture of what righteous living looks like, and it's one man and one woman, and you stay committed to each other, and you build a family, and you don't give your husband to your maidservant anymore, because that was
Right.
wrong when they did it,
Right.
and so you know,
So did when God said that He was going to give them a child, did He say that it was going to be Sarah? He does in the next chapter, I know for sure, but
well, he made the promise to Abram.
He made it to Abram. But
He said your descendants will be as
right, He did do that.
vast as
But
and then I think he said something about uh, I think I'm getting my people mixed up
so
now. I
so
think it was
from a logical standpoint, I think I saw Christine earlier said, this sounds familiar. It's almost like did God really say, which was the sin that caused sin in the Garden of Eden, questioning God. But it seems like um, that they got antsy because it had been a long time, and 10 years is really a long time, and nothing had happened, and she wasn't able to bear a child before then, so there's no reason for her to think that she's going to be able to bear one now, and especially since she's old. So and I would think, of course, they lived longer back then. I mean, the lifespans haven't reduced down a whole lot yet. I mean,
mm-hmm,
they have a lot. I mean, they're not living 900 years anymore. I forget
right.
how old Abraham is when he dies, but he has more children after this.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
my I guess my thinking is that I think they had a sense that that wasn't probably the way to go, but they were just trying to hurry things up because they thought their time was running out. It'd be like the idea that you pray for God to answer, and then He provides the answer, you don't recognize it. So it could be that in their mind they're thinking, oh well, that was the whole reason we ended up down in Egypt. because we got this maidservant. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do. But that's not what God told him to do.
Right.
We
Right. Well,
have a lot more information now than probably he had then, although he was having face-to-face conversations, or God was speaking to him in a vision. We'll
right.
see in the next chapter,
Maybe.
especially, he does see the Lord. But so I guess, it's possible maybe they didn't know that they were actually committing a sin by doing this, but it seems like that if you're in love with someone. Of course, now as I say that, I realize that they went down to Egypt, and he said, "Hey, just say that you're my sister, and they
Right.
won't kill me, and they'll just take you as the wife." And I'm
Hmm.
thinking, "Yikes!" I'm not sure how. Usually, people are a little jealous of that kind of thing. I mean, in a marriage relationship, you just don't give your spouse up.
Uh,
You see
yeah,
what I'm saying?
I do, but we are a few thousand years past that in a different culture
Yeah, we
with
are.
a completely different concept of what the marriage relationship represents. Um, there was a there's a lot of things, particularly in the Old Testament, and some of them get moved into the New Testament, where the responsibilities of family members, brothers, if your brother dies, then you are supposed to take his wife as your own, so that she is basically not, adrift by herself in a society, without a without
Hmm.
a being connected to a man. The women were lost. They didn't have a family, that they couldn't.
Hmm.
And so all of those rules were in place to basically provide women and children with a family, a place that they could be. And it seems, it's not very romantic the way we understand romance, with having, first of all, we care about having feelings. We have to have all these feelings for each other before we
Yeah,
can
but
make a
I think
commitment.
that,
And
yeah, I would agree. But people are still people, and so uh, even though they didn't have the law that was given through Moses, but I think they're still human beings, and there's something about the sexual act that connects a man and a woman, um, that I think that they understood. What do you think about this when Sarah, when Hagar gets pregnant and then she starts treating, she has an attitude,
right,
and Sarah gets upset about it, and then she goes and complains to Abram, and she says that it's this is your fault. This is all your fault.
right, like
So,
it
what
was
are your
your
thoughts
idea.
of that?
Right.
Yeah,
It's typical. I mean, it's what happens when
it's human nature. Yeah.
it's human nature, and it's also, um, I'm not sure how to say this without getting in trouble, but yeah, I'm really not. But women, don't necessarily do well together. When they're trying to share a household, they don't
Yeah.
do well together when they're trying to share a household. That was one of the things that I noticed. I didn't spend a lot of time watching whatever that thing was that was on television about the Mormon family, and the guy had like four or five
Oh,
wives. I don't remember what
didn't
it was,
watch a minute,
but
not a minute. I didn't watch
I
not a second of that show.
well, I saw more than a second of it, but I didn't. I wasn't like an avid watcher. But what struck me was the amount of drama that that was taking place between these people who had sort of agreed that, yeah, we're all cool with you having more than one wife. We're all cool with that, but they really weren't cool with it.
They
They were
weren't
there
cool
was a
with it.
there was a lot of jealousy and a lot of fighting and a lot of,
Yeah.
and I understand that. It's
Yeah.
not meant to be that way. Yeah, Dale says it's Big Love. I think that's what it was called.
Big love.
Big Love is a funny, weird way to say
Yeah,
it.
it is.
But so you've got Sarah, who's like, yeah, well, Sarah, this will be a great idea. I'll give my maidservant to my husband, and then she'll get pregnant, and then we'll start this family. But I don't think she was thinking through. I don't think she was going, okay, well,
Yeah.
how am I going to feel when this other woman
Right.
is
Right.
carrying the, the promise, and it just wasn't thought through
I think that, yeah, that's another typical
it was a
human nature
relief.
thing,
Yeah.
is that we don't think of the consequences. A lot of times we just do the act and think about it, and then later on go, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. Or I don't think, I didn't expect that response from that person because they
Mm-hmm.
hadn't thought it through. There's a lot of things that a lot of people should just keep to themselves, especially on Twitter. A lot of things don't need to be said. Just everything that's floating around in your head, you have to edit and not just say everything that comes through floating through your head.
Right. Well, she was word watcher saying, "How can you think it through?" Well, I think how you can think it through is you can say, "Okay, I'm going to give my husband to my maidservant, or vice versa, and then she is going to become pregnant." And then you can just go, "Okay, when she's pregnant, how am I going to feel about
How am I going to
that?
feel about that?
Yeah,
Right.
how am I going to feel when she's wandering around pregnant and I'm barren?
Yeah.
What am I going to, what's that going to do?" And
The
I
other
think
thing
you
too is I
project.
see. So God has spoken to Abram, uh, but there's no indication that he asked God for help. In this situation,
Mm-hmm.
there's no prayer here. It's just, oh, hey, I got an idea. How about this? Why don't we do this? Let's see how this works.
Mm-hmm.
And so the world is still uh, experiencing the ramifications of this act, because I think most people believe that Ishmael will be, becomes the father of the Arabic people. The
Mm-hmm.
Arab nations come from him, which most of those now, since 600s, uh, because of Muhammad, have become Muslim, and they worship the God of Islam.
Right.
So before that time period, they weren't Muslim, but it's that area, they've all kind of become that. In the beginning, Muhammad forced people to become Muslim or they'd lose their life. I mean, it was a religion by force.
It's still kind of that
And
way, isn't it?
yeah, sure it is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they do cut people's heads off for the
Mm-hmm.
infidel. I mean, the radicals do. And, then you've got, so anyway, yeah, what I was saying there is that, and it's interesting too, is that the Jewish people, Islamic people, and Christians all look to Abraham, Father Abraham, man of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Except
Right.
the Muslim people say that the blessing from God went through Ishmael and not through Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well, you could make a case for that. It says, what does it say? You're, I will give you more descendants than you can count,
sure.
which is similar to what he said to Abram. Well, it was
Yeah,
similar to what he said, yeah. And Abram is their father as well, and so
sure. So
you know.
then, how do you take this? He says, "This son of yours will be a wild man, as
Mm-hmm.
untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all of his relatives."
Mm-hmm. Meaning,
So
meaning the people, the other children of Abram.
yeah, so Isaac and all of those descendants, so this one will be in open hostility against, yeah, Isaac and all of his descendants.
Right.
That prophecy is obviously true. That
Mm-hmm.
has been true in every generation.
Mm-hmm. And so the way that it is written, it's interesting because he says this is what he's going to be a wild man, going to raise his fist against everyone. Everyone will be against him
Hmm.
in open hostility, and that is from the perspective of Ishmael,
Yes.
and it's not. it's not necessarily a curse on uh, the other side of the family, but that's kind of how it plays out, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they're at war with each other, um, and so it's become it's a bad thing for both sides,
Well,
and
I
that
would say
is
this. I would say this about the Jewish people. There would be peace in the Middle East tomorrow if the Arabic people would just stop launching bombs into Israel, stop attacking, stop, promising that you're going to drive them into the sea. I mean, Israel lives under constant threat, and I mean, we wouldn't put up with that if Mexico was threatening us constantly and lobbing bombs into the country. We just wouldn't. We wouldn't settle for that. Do you think so? You think that we'd be fine with just lobbing some bombs in here? I don't think so. I think that we'd probably take care of business.
I don't know. They're launching all sorts of people through
Yeah,
on the
that's a little different, but
into the
yeah, people,
country,
they're sending people.
and we put up with Cuba for a number of years.
Yeah, but they
Um,
haven't shot at us though.
well, they haven't shot at us, but I guess yeah, I don't know. Um, I guess it
When
would
I
depend
read,
on who's in office when they were
that's
launching
true.
bombs.
That is true. But when I read about like when Israel is under attack, and the media doesn't do it justice, there thousands and thousands of bombs are just raining in, and
Hmm.
it's if not for the Iron Dome that they are able to shoot a bullet with a bullet and knock it out of the sky. That's the only thing
Hmm.
that's really saved them from massive loss of life and kept them from just full out war. Now Israel will retaliate, and they target. It's interesting because uh, the the Hamas and Hezbollah are the two main terrorist groups over there, and they'll set up their rocket launchers on top of apartment buildings.
Hmm.
And so then, what Israel will do is they will send out a warning: we're going to bomb this building, so you need to get out. And then
Right.
they come in and bomb it. But
Right.
Hamas does that especially because they want the casualties, because then it makes Israel look bad. They want civilian casualties.
Right. Well, I think that
I would agree with
Christine says
Christine. I would agree. I
agree.
would agree with that. They are deceived into believing that that's true. Look, that same thing happened with Jacob and Esau. The
Hmm.
blessing went to Jacob; it didn't go to Esau. And besides that, Esau gave up his birthright for a bowl of soup. Later on, we're told. We'll get to that
Hmm.
later. But so God pinpoints who in this lineage was going to get the blessing, and the blessing was the line of the Messiah and uh, the Jewish people in particular.
Hmm. Well, and there is a where it gets tricky is like Ray says, we all think we're right, and
Hmm.
it gets tricky if you are if you're Ishmael. If you're
Yeah,
Ishmael
right.
and you're born into this situation that is uh, that's not your fault, and you've got your father and your mother at odds with your what would it be, step grandmother? What would Sarai be?
Yeah.
Whatever. Whatever the relationship is, it's a fractured family, and it's not your fault, and you are not the favored child.
Hmm.
Um, you are
And see, they could also make a claim. So Ishmael could make a claim: I'm the firstborn son from Abraham.
right,
I'm the firstborn. The firstborn gets the blessing, right? He's the one that gets the biggest portion of the inheritance and all of that.
right.
But God did the same thing with Jacob and Esau. So
Hmm.
they're twins. Jacob is born second. Esau is the firstborn, but the
Hmm.
blessing went to Jacob and not Esau. So God did
Yeah,
that twice. He did this.
right. And it was through uh, some sort of trickery. Jacob
Yeah, right. In the
Jacob
case of
basically
Jacob, yeah,
stole it.
he
Basically
did.
stole it.
He
Took advantage of his
deceived.
father's poor eyesight and and
But
stole it.
it's See, he stole it, but it's interesting that God told his mother's name. Forget is it, what's his mom's name? Is it Rebecca or is it Rachel?
Who?
No. So Isaac's wife, is it Rebecca?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then
Rebecca, where's
Jacob
Jeff?
fell in
Where's
love with
Jeff Lane?
Rachel.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Where's Jeff Lane? So
Rachel
yeah.
and Leah, or
So
Leah.
anyway, so that, um, but she was told that the older will serve the younger. I think she was told that. We'll get to that when that happens. That's in a
We're
couple of
skipping
chapters.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this is why it's difficult to make proclamations about who's right and who's wrong in this, because you've got the
Hmm.
prophecy that says this is going to happen, and then when it happens we go, well, yeah, but there was skullduggery, there was deception, and is that
Yeah.
right? Is God okay with that because it was part of the prophecy? And it's it's tricky to make a proclamation. I don't know. I don't know how to. I don't know how to square it always.
Well, Christine says that Edom is from Esau. That's correct, and she said he's going to get his in Jeremiah. A lot of the minor prophets, not Jeremiah, but like Obadiah, I think, is a prophecy against Edom, and also Malachi. Malachi is a prophecy against Edom as well,
Hmm.
because the Edomites were against their brother, the Jewish people.
Yep. Well,
Yeah,
everybody was against the Jewish people.
yeah,
Um,
even today.
right. And I would agree that they think they're correct. Um, and there is a lot of hostility that's basically baked in at this point. It's been going on
Hmm.
for literally thousands of years, and you just grow up with this hostility towards the people who are not of your blood, who are not of your kin, and that's what is so strange about the New Testament covenant, which says, okay, now there's no Jews or Greeks, and there's no male or
Hmm.
female, but you're all to be united with each other. And it's such a difficult concept
Mm.
within that area, because it's just been hundreds and hundreds and
Yeah. So
hundreds of years of
as
open hostility.
as you remember, when we were in the Book of Acts, we read about that, about how that was a difficult thing for Peter, especially. And then Peter said, okay, God speaks to him. He goes to Cornelius's house, and here's this Gentile centurion who gets saved, and the Spirit comes on him. He's speaking in tongues. So
Speaks
this
in
is all
tongues.
registering with Peter. And then
Hmm.
Peter later on kind of goes back on that and goes back to his old ways. Well, we don't
Hmm.
have anything to do with the Greeks. And then Paul calls him out publicly for that.
Right.
Uh, so
Right.
yeah,
Because
you're
it'd be
right. It's
hard.
a difficult thing to break our old habits, and I guess it's kind of encouraging that when we see that these biblical characters, these people who lived through it, and it's documented for us that they struggled with it too. They had some habits that were hard to break.
Right. And the thing that is always on my mind when I'm reading the Old Testament is these
Yeah.
people did not have the New Testament yet.
Right.
They had some prophecies, they
Right.
had some
Yeah, they
inklings
didn't.
about things, but everything was very cryptic and
It was
and kind of indiscernible.
it was
Um,
it was just being rolled out to them a little bit at a time.
and we're looking
They
back
also
through it. We've got,
what they didn't have though, John, and this would have probably solved the whole thing. They didn't have critical race theory. If they'd had critical race theory teaching, I think that they would probably all just gotten
as a tool to understand the other
sure.
perspective.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Of
that
course,
would have
I'm
given them the
joking.
insight that they needed.
Somebody will just take that little clip and say, "See, Varvel, this is what Varvel thinks
Well,
about
but
this."
that is why, yeah, that's this. Gary Marvel thinks critical race theory is what we need.
Yeah.
The but you're basically correct, because they didn't have critical race theory, and they also didn't have the New Testament, and so but
Hmm.
we do, and so we
Yeah.
look back with the benefit of having the New Testament and being able to see what the covenant is going to, how the new covenant is
Yeah.
going to work,
Yeah.
and but it's not fair for us to go back and apply that new covenant to those people, because it was a different set of circumstances and a different set of
Yeah.
rules that they were living
It
under.
it was, and at the same time, we still have the same God who doesn't change. And so, you're right. They didn't have the written word, so they didn't have all the knowledge that we have here. They're just flying by the seat of their pants, and what little that they're given at a time.
Hmm.
It becomes it becomes clearer as they go, as they're living it. Of course, it gets documented for us, and then it becomes
Hmm.
clearer for us.
They didn't even have the Ten
So,
Commandments yet,
no, they didn't. Yeah,
and so all of this stuff about uh, atonement for sin and things like that. I am not even sure how they conceptualized that. And that's a thing. I'm so murky on it that I can't even really comment on it. But
hmm,
I've wondered, okay, what did morality look like? What was right and what
yeah.
was wrong? Because there was nothing stated yet, and so
So
it had to be a conscience level thing at some point, and
yeah.
that's why I wonder if Abram and Sarai were were following their conscience, because no one had told them you're not supposed to be sexually immoral.
Yeah.
It wasn't written down yet.
So dispensationalists would call this the age of conscience, that this was the dispensation of conscience, because that's
Hmm.
really all they had. It was God had given them a conscience to know right and wrong, and they were just kind of going by that. But you saw that in Genesis, by the time of Genesis chapter 6, that had gone terribly awry because
Hmm.
uh, because people were doing what was evil. I mean, their
What
thoughts
was
were evil
wicked?
constantly. Yeah. So,
Right.
but it's not really until Moses gives us the Ten Commandments, and then he starts writing the scriptures from the first five books. And then, so then they had the written word that they had to study to know.
Right. And then they had laws.
Yeah.
They had these crazy laws, like
Yeah.
you're only supposed to eat certain kinds of food, and you're supposed to do ceremonial washing and all that. And we read through
Yeah.
that in the Old Testament and go, "Wow, some of these laws are kind of
Yeah.
weird."
Yeah.
Um, but they didn't have anything on record prior to that other than their own
No.
conscience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, it's really difficult to again look back at that when we've got the benefit of having Christ say, you're not supposed to be selfish. Basically, you're supposed to love God. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, and
Yeah.
and maybe there was primitive concepts of that back in antiquities before they were writing things down. Maybe that was kind of the rule of thumb. I don't know, but it was
Yeah,
different.
I would agree there's a lot that we don't know. But what we do know is what God wants us to know, and he's written it down for us here. So in the next chapter, God gets specific with Abraham and says, uh, your wife Sarah is going to bear a child. And I think he says a year from now, or maybe he says it later, but I think it's the next chapter. And then Sarah laughs.
Right.
Um,
Because he was 99 years old now. So he was 86, and then he was
so
99. He was 86 when
so
Ishmael was born. He was 99 when the Lord appeared to him. So that was another 13
right,
years
right.
later.
13 years later. Um, that's a long time. So then it would end up being about 20 some years from the time that Abram got the promise until it was fulfilled. Now, we know, because we have the book of Hebrews, why did God wait so long to give them this child? Because God wanted everyone to know that this is the miracle child that God provides. The only way that that Isaac is born as if it's a miracle. And he did the same thing with John the Baptist. Elizabeth couldn't have any children, and then when she's an old woman, she gets pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And there again, God does a miracle to prove that this is by me. This is by my hand. This is a special birth. Isaac is a special birth. In the case of looking at these Ishmael and Isaac um, as a spiritual lesson, Isaac is the son of promise. He's of the spirit, and Ishmael is of the flesh, because it was them just getting together in the flesh to create Ishmael.
Right.
And so as we go through life, uh, we have a decision to make. We're going to do things in the flesh. We're going to do things in the spirit. We're going to walk by the spirit. If you walk by the spirit, then you won't fulfill the lust of your flesh. And so then every day is got these it's this balance. You have to decide. Okay, am I going to walk in the spirit? And we don't think of it in those terms. It's just, oh, this is what my flesh feels like doing, but what does God want me to do? And like I said before, there was no indication in this chapter that they prayed about it. They didn't ask, God. They didn't call out to Him. Uh, so, and I don't know how much people prayed back then. We're not really told. We're just kind of
Mm-hmm.
skimming through, and we're flying over about 30,000 feet, so we're not seeing all the details of life. These chapters are going pretty quick.
Right. Well, it said, uh, the angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring, and the angel said to her, "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" And so, yeah, it doesn't say that Hagar cried out to God. It says that an
No,
angel found her.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know at what point people got the idea that
Now,
they could pray, because
yeah,
there's a point where we're not even to the priests yet. We're not even to the laws of
right.
Moses, where people were not people needed the Levites to inter, interact with God on their behalf. You don't have the regular old run of the mill Hebrew children speaking to God. The
Hmm.
priests do all of that for them on their behalf.
Right. So this is not the only time that Hagar leaves. So after Isaac is born, and I think this might be chapter 21, then uh,
Things get bad again.
things get bad again, because
Mm-hmm.
because Sarah doesn't think that Ishmael is treating Isaac nicely, and so then and again, so they kick her out, and so
Mm-hmm.
she leaves, and I think that she says that she feels like she's going to die in the wilderness with Ishmael, but then God hears her. Oh, in chapter 21, verse 17, and God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven. So there must have been something that you could call a prayer. They were crying out for help, and
Mm-hmm.
and God answers. Interesting. So this will be. We're getting into some meat here, because I'm sorry that I missed last week, because you guys did the covenant where they cut the animals and split them in
Cut them in
two, and
half.
then
Yeah.
yeah, and I remember teaching a lesson on that. I did a lot of study on that, and one of the things I learned was that a covenant has to do with blood. So the covenant with Abraham about the circumcision is is there's blood involved, because you have to cut the foreskin.
Mm-hmm.
In the covenant that God made with Abraham, they cut these animals into, and what they're saying is, from what I understand, what they're saying is that if I fail to keep my covenant with you, then you can do to me what we've done to these animals. You can cut me into. But
Mm-hmm.
notice that usually what the two parties that make the covenant would walk between the the carcasses, walk between them. And but in this case, God knew that there was no way Abraham could keep the covenant. He knew that he had flesh and he would fail. He's a sinner. So God puts him to sleep, basically. He falls into deep sleep. And then God goes between the carcasses himself as smoke and as fire.
Hmm.
And so God is keeping the covenant. And so when later on, when Abraham's descendants break the covenant, then God will take the punishment on himself. And that's what he did when Jesus went to the cross. He took, I'm sure you covered all of that last week, but it just was fresh in my mind. Uh, so when you think of the covenant, Jesus said in the Last Supper, in the upper room, uh, he said, "This cup, this is my body, broken for you, taken to eat."
Hmm.
Then he said, "This is my cup. It's the new covenant in my blood.
Hmm.
Take this." And then so it was like beforehand, his his crucifixion, where he sheds his blood for us. That's the blood covenant. And now sometimes we use the terms of a marriage covenant, but nobody's bleeding in that. So, but all the other times when you look at the Bible, it's a blood covenant. Something dies or something's bleeding.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, we didn't talk specifically about what you had what you had covered, but we did talk about the blood as there's so much blood in the Old Testament. I
Yes, there
mean,
is.
and if you start reading through the law, into Exodus and certainly Deuteronomy and Leviticus,
Hmm.
they're just killing animals all the time, like
Yeah.
all of the feasts and all of the ceremonies and all
Hmm.
of the just lots and lots and lots of animals die. And I think that's because God was painting a picture for mankind. He was saying this is what happens because of sin.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is what it brings about. And look at all
Yeah.
this death. Look at these
Yeah.
gallons and gallons and gallons of blood and
Yeah.
entrails
Yeah.
and just dead animals and dead birds and all because of sin, all because of all
Hmm.
of these. And it would be very difficult to get the idea that your sin and your wickedness are just minor infractions, or as we like to refer to them in our culture, as just brokenness or mistakes. Yeah, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
Everybody makes mistakes. When you're
Yeah.
up to your armpits in blood, it would be very difficult to go, "Oops, I just made a little minor mistake." And
Yeah.
God is saying, "No, look at all of this death that takes place."
Hmm.
And I think that I think that we forget that because now the uh, we have Christ who has taken our place, but we're actually offended by the gruesomeness of sin. When
Yeah.
we talked about the Passion of the Christ, when that movie came out,
Yeah.
there were a bunch
Hard
of
to
Christian
watch.
people who were critical of that because it was so graphic and so horrific, and it's
Yeah.
like we don't need to see that. And it's like, yeah, that's how far we have come from our
Yeah.
understanding of what sin does in the world. We're like now we're offended by the graphic portrayal of Christ on the cross because it is offensive. But that's
Yeah.
kind of the
Yeah.
point.
Right.
That's kind of what we're
Right.
supposed to
Right.
realize, that yeah, it's gruesome and it's horrific and it is shameful. That's what I think God was trying to drill into us for those hundreds of years,
Yeah.
that was how he dealt with us. This was how your sin was dealt with, and we just have
So
forgotten it.
um, I'm I just found a Christianity Today column in which is talking about, because I was looking up the information, how many Christians have been martyred since Jesus. And one of the
Oh,
things I found a column that somebody had written, and they're estimating, nobody knows for sure, but they're estimating 70 million Christians have died since Jesus was here on the earth. And then it gives some lists of,
you mean
like
being
a
martyred?
million, yeah,
70
martyred.
million
So like
martyred?
70 million. So like a million. we always hear about 6 million Jews dying in World War II by the hands of the Nazis, but
Hmm.
there were a million Christians who died as well in that war because of the Nazis. And then uh, China, you know, they killed a whole bunch,
Right.
and Russia as well during the time of
From
the
Stalin
Soviet. Yeah, and
and Lenin.
so
Yeah.
what I'm writing about is the what's the biggest threat to Christian people. And historically and biblically, it's the government. Governments have been the ones that threaten Christians and put them to death. And I mean, Rome did that. Even the religious leaders of Israel in the time of Christ, they were
Hmm.
rounding up Christians. And so it's the powers that be. Now, so this is interesting. Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul writes chapter 13, in which he tells us that we are to obey the government, and pay our taxes and all of that.
Hmm.
But he was the guy who was in trouble more than any other person in the New Testament. He was the one who
Right.
was constantly being arrested, whipped, beaten, thrown rocks at, stoned, and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So as long as God institutes government for order among people who are a bunch of sinners, but when the government becomes corrupt, they lose that authority. In the same way that I heard John MacArthur give this illustration, in the same way that a husband father's been given authority to lead his family. But if he becomes abusive to the family, he loses that right. He doesn't have a right to lead them anymore, and not by God. So there are limits as long as they're, and so as a nation becomes more ungodly, they start violating God's statutes. And get ready, as Christians, we're the ones in the crosshairs. So this just happened this past week or 2 weeks ago. No, it was last week. Seattle, there's a Christian ministry in Seattle. They do
I
really
didn't know
radical
that.
stuff. They do really radical stuff like they feed the poor and they
Right.
give people shelter, and they do that kind of stuff. It's been there since 1932. So they got sued by a lawyer who wanted to work for them, and they won't hire him because he's not a Christian and he doesn't believe what they believe. So he
Hmm.
sued them, and the Washington Supreme Court sided with him against the ministry. Now this makes my head spin, but this is where we are now. So
Hmm.
in America, where we have the First Amendment that says that Congress can make no law, inhibiting religious freedom,
The
right?
free
Right,
exercise, establishment of religion, or the free
exactly.
exercise thereof. Yeah.
The free exercise. So here you have a ministry who's been free exercising their ministry for 30 since 1932, and now all of a sudden their Supreme Court says you have to hire people who are not Christians.
Hmm.
You have to hire people who don't think the way you think, and don't have the same values you have. This is getting to be a difficult time in America. Now this would have been unheard of just 10 years ago, but now this kind of thing's starting to happen. And what I think as Christians is uh, you're going to have to pull on your big boy pants, because I think this is not going to be the one and done. I think this is going to start happening, and especially if they can get away with it out there, it's going to start cropping up all over the country, because that's what Satan does. Is he constantly is attacking the church, and so we have to have Christians who can take a stand against it. I mean, it can't. We're not going to go along with that. So there are
Yeah.
times when you have to have civil disobedience, and uh, Peter and John did it in Acts chapter 4. They were warned by the Sanhedrin, we don't want you preaching in his name anymore.
Right.
They said, you have to judge that for yourself. But as for us, we have to we have to say what we saw. And so they kept on speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a that's a whole can of worms that we have just opened up, because I had a conversation. I wrote about the guy who killed his daughter's boyfriend. Did you hear about
Yeah, I
that
saw
story?
that. I heard you talk about it a little bit last week at the end
Yeah.
of the show.
Well, and it's it's kind of a parallel idea, because we've got this idea about justice and how justice needs to prevail, and
Yeah.
we need to seek justice and truth and righteousness, all of which I agree with. But there are a bunch of conservative people now, people on the side of evangelicalism, conservatives, people who identify as Christians. Matt Walsh is one of them, who was speaking affirmatively and in support of this father for basically committing murder. And Matt
Yeah.
Walsh came out and said pretty strongly, this is what a good father would do. Any good father would do this, to protect his daughter. And I'm going, wait a second, this sounds this sounds like what the other side was saying last summer when
Hmm.
the riots were taking place again out in Oregon and Washington, and
Yeah.
these places were being Spokane, places are being burned, and people are going into the streets, and they're looting, and they're fighting, and they're
Right.
rioting, and those people were being represented as, well, they're just tired of the justice system failing them, and so they are
Right.
doing the only thing that they can do because the justice system has failed them. And it's like, okay, well, you guys are now saying the same thing. That's exactly
Yeah.
what these
Yeah.
Christians are saying. Well, this father, the justice system is so broken that this father had no choice but to take the law into his own hands to seek justice. And what is lost, apparently, on both sides, is that you don't fight injustice with more injustice. You don't
Exactly.
you don't solve injustice by going out and being
Yeah.
unjust yourself.
Right.
And Christians are supposed to know that.
Yeah.
And
Look at what
so,
Ray Bates said. She's right here. Ray Bates. Vengeance is God's. Yeah.
right. But
Yeah. Right.
if we're going to talk about civil disobedience, while I agree, we have to remember that we are talking to people who have an entirely different concept of what it means to be civilly disobedient.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah. I
Christian
get you.
people who legitimately are going to say, "Oh, that means that we can go out and commit murder because we have been
No.
wronged." And
Yeah. I get what you're saying there. And that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm
oh, I
saying
know,
that just exactly what we have examples scripturally is Peter and John said, we are not going to do what you're telling us to do. So in the case of that ministry out there in Seattle, it would be better for them to just shut the whole thing down than to say, okay, all right, you forced our hand, we'll have to hire the guy. No, 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 you can't do that, because if you start compromising on one thing, it continues. Why is it? And Dennis Prager has written about this so many times. He keeps writing the same column, but it keeps getting better and better. The left destroys everything they touch, and they won't leave anything alone. Everything that's in society, it's like they've got to get their hands on it so they can ruin it. And that's what they do. I mean, here's a ministry that's been working and it's been effective. In fact, 20% of the people who work at the ministry were at one time a client of the ministry. They were the people in need being served, and now they are now serving
hmm
and working there. And so it's working. People are getting, finding employment, getting out of the situation they're in. But then you have a guy who says, well, he wants to go in and change it.
right.
And
Well, I
and
think
here's
that
the other thing too. Obviously, because he's not a Christian, so he doesn't believe in Christ, and so he may be even for the feeding of the poor. But it's Christ this thing that's the thing that changes people's lives. It's not another meal. It's Jesus Christ that's in their hearts. That's
right,
what changes people.
right. Well, and that's what I was going to say, that we have this, even the terminology that we're using now, and this connects to the idea that we don't understand what sin is anymore. We don't understand how serious it is.
Right.
And we also
Yeah.
don't understand, on the other side of that coin, we don't understand how important Christ is. We give lip service to that, but
Yeah.
we still talk in terms of the left, and it bothers me when Christian people say, well, the left does this and the left does that. We're not talking about the left or the right politically. We're talking
We're
about
talking about
godless
ungodly.
versus
Yeah.
unright.
Godless.
And
Right.
we need to be more firm in saying it's not the left that destroys
Yeah,
everything.
and
It's
so
godless people.
I've been writing that more and more since you've brought that to my attention. I did say left, but I normally, if I'm writing it, I don't say the left anymore. I say ungodly,
Yeah,
ungodly people.
Right.
And if
Because
you identify with that, then you're identifying with ungodly people. There you
right.
go.
And it's also a way of, I mean, it politicizes things, and everybody is saying, well, you shouldn't politicize things. You shouldn't politicize things. And I would agree, if we're using the term left versus right, then that makes it sound like it's just a disagreement. You know, it's like, well, people on the right think this way and people on the left think that way, and there's always been that disagreement. This is not just a disagreement of opinion. It's not just a difference of political views.
Yeah.
It's right versus wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
if we believe that we are right to do what the Bible says, then we need to say that. And
Yeah.
anybody who is
Yeah.
not living by biblical principles is wrong. And we need to say that with a capital W. It's wrong.
Right.
It's not just leftism,
I
it's
agree.
paganism.
So Christine thinks that Sarah and Abram got tired of waiting for the Lord to circle back. Is that what she's saying there?
Yes. Circle back is a
Jen Psaki
it's a
euphemism.
Right. Oh my
All
gosh.
right, John, I think I'm done.
Okay. Well, it was
I think
It was
I've told
good.
my kids several times. I used when I was teaching at Bethesda Christian School, teaching art for 14 years. Every year, I would have these kids give them a project, and they would come back up and say, "Mr. Varvel, can I be done?"
yeah.
Not I am done, or
Can I be
it
done?
was, can I be done? So the last book I'll write before I die, I'm going to call it "Can I Be Done."
Gary Darwin, or just I'm done.
No, I think "Can I Be Done?" I've been doing everything. So can I be done with this?
Can
All right.
I stop now? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody
All
for
right,
being
John.
here.
Enjoyed
Good to
it.
see you this
Be
week,
back.
Gary.